The blockade has been running for less than 48 hours, and it has already accomplished something no airstrike could. It has produced a precise, publicly reported number that defines exactly where the gap between war and peace actually lies. The United States wants Iran to suspend uranium enrichment for 20 years. Iran has agreed to 5. That 15-year difference, a number small enough to negotiate, large enough to be politically insurmountable in its current form, is the specific distance that stands between a deal and a resumption of war. Not the principle of enrichment, not the existence of nuclear facilities, not whether Iran can have a civilian nuclear program. The moratorium length, 20 versus 5. That is the board as it stands this morning. This is April 15th, 2026, day 47. Let us break down everything that has changed in the past 24 hours, because quite a lot has. Start with the blockade's operational result. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper posted on Tuesday that the blockade of Iranian ports has been fully implemented and that U.S. forces have achieved maritime superiority in the Middle East. His precise claim? In less than 36 hours since implementation, U.S. forces have completely halted economic trade going into and out of Iran by sea. He added the data point that frames the severity of this in stark terms. Approximately 90% of Iran's economy is fueled by international sea trade. That claim needs some qualification. Sanctioned tankers, vessels that Iran has been using to move oil in defiance of Western restrictions, have continued to transit the strait. A Chinese-flagged tanker completed a transit on Tuesday. The blockade is enforced against vessels declaring Iranian ports as destinations, not against all vessels claiming to transit between non-Iranian ports. Iran's network of shadow shipping, which has sustained its oil exports throughout years of sanctions, does not operate through declared Iranian destinations. So the blockade is genuinely effective against legitimate maritime commerce, while its ability to stop clandestine Iranian oil exports through third-country intermediaries remains limited. But the psychological and economic pressure is real, even where enforcement is imperfect. Shipping insurance has not normalized. War risk premiums remain prohibitive. The 800-plus commercial vessels stranded inside the Gulf since the war began are still waiting. A UN spokesperson warned that about 20,000 vessels are reported stranded globally in supply chains disrupted by the strait closure. The blockade adds another layer of legal and commercial risk that keeps legitimate shipping away, regardless of IRGC activity. The key insight from the blockade's first operational days: it does not need to be a perfect physical seal to generate economic pressure. It needs to be credible enough to paralyze commercial decision-making, and it is doing exactly that. Now the nuclear number, because this is the story today, and understanding it changes how you read everything else. Al Jazeera reported on Tuesday, citing sources familiar with the Islamabad negotiations, that the specific breakdown point was this: the United States demanded a 20-year moratorium on Iranian uranium enrichment. Iran agreed to 5 years. That gap, 15 years on a clock that has not yet started, is what sent Vance to the airport at 7 a.m. on Sunday. This is enormously clarifying. For weeks, the public framing from both sides was abstract: the nuclear issue, enrichment red lines, affirmative commitments. Now we have the number. And the number tells a very specific story. A 20-year moratorium takes any Iranian enrichment capacity off the table through 2046. That is long enough to encompass 2 additional U.S. presidential election cycles, multiple Iranian leadership transitions, a full generation of geopolitical change. From Washington's perspective, 20 years of zero enrichment gives the international community enough time to verify that Iran has structurally abandoned the nuclear weapons pathway, not just paused it. Iran's 5-year counter is not arbitrary either. 5 years is the approximate time frame of the original JCPOA's most restrictive clauses before the sunset provisions began to lift. Iran is essentially proposing a return to the 2015 deal's timeline structure, with the implicit understanding that after 5 years, enrichment resumes under modified conditions. From Tehran's perspective, agreeing to 20 years would mean surrendering a sovereign capability for nearly half a century, an unprecedented concession that no Iranian leadership, regardless of faction, could politically survive. The IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, weighed in on Tuesday, saying the length of any moratorium is, ultimately, a political decision. That careful phrasing is the IAEA diplomatically refusing to endorse either position while signaling that it will work with whatever timeframe the parties agree on. The IAEA wants inspections back. It has not had full access to Iranian nuclear sites since the war began. Whatever the moratorium length, a deal that restores IAEA access is preferable to no deal from the agency's technical standpoint. The 15-year gap is real, but it is also the kind of gap that negotiators can work with, precisely because it is numerical rather than principled.
The question of whether Iran has a right to enrich at all is a values question, nearly impossible to bridge. The question of whether the moratorium is 10 years instead of 20 or 8 years instead of 5 is an arithmetic question. Arithmetic questions have solutions. Whether the political will exists to find one is a different matter. While the moratorium gap dominates the nuclear framing, there is a satellite intelligence revelation from Tuesday that belongs in this analysis, because it shows what both sides are doing with the ceasefire that has nothing to do with diplomacy. CNN reported, citing satellite images reviewed by its analysts, that Iran has been using the ceasefire window to clear debris from the entrances to its underground missile bases. The images, taken on April 10th, show front-end loaders scooping rubble from blocked tunnel entrances while dump trucks line up nearby. These are the missile cities, Iran's network of underground launch facilities. The U.S. and Israel had been systematically striking the tunnel entrances throughout the war to trap missile launchers inside, preventing them from driving out to fire and from returning to reload. U.S. intelligence assessed that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers remained intact after a month of fighting. Those launchers were buried. Iran is now digging them out. Separately, satellite images from The Week and other outlets show that Iran has been fortifying the entrances to its Isfahan nuclear complex, adding new barriers and roadblocks at the tunnel entrances where its enriched uranium stockpile is believed to be stored. 18 barrels, believed to contain enriched uranium, were photographed arriving at the southern tunnel entrance. Makeshift roadblocks have been erected, designed to add complexity and delay to any ground operation attempting to seize the material. So during the ceasefire, the same period in which both sides are publicly discussing diplomacy, Iran is simultaneously restoring its missile launch capacity and hardening its nuclear storage sites against seizure. This is not unique to Iran. Ceasefire periods have historically been used for military reconstitution by all parties. What makes it strategically significant here is that the U.S. has explicitly stated it wants to retrieve the nuclear dust, Trump's phrase for seizing Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. The satellite images show Iran is preparing specifically for that scenario. And every day the ceasefire extends, those preparations become more complete. The diplomatic picture today is more active than yesterday, and more concrete. Reuters reported Tuesday, confirmed by 4 sources, that U.S. and Iranian negotiation teams will return to Islamabad this week for a second round of talks.
Trump told the New York Post that talks could happen over the next 2 days, then called back 30 minutes later to update that Islamabad was the confirmed venue. The White House confirmed to CNBC that a second in-person meeting is under discussion. Vance is expected to lead again. Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan gave the most precise ceasefire extension proposal yet, a 45 to 60-day extension to allow negotiations to continue. If the parties make good progress, an additional ceasefire could be introduced, Fidan said in a state media interview. He warned that Israel and the enrichment question were both potential landmines, but expressed conditional optimism. The ceasefire expires April 21st. If talks resume in Islamabad in the next 48 hours and both sides agree to extend, even without resolving the moratorium gap, the war enters a third phase of managed stalemate under diplomatic cover. That is not peace, but it is the absence of resumed bombing.
And given where the global economy is, the difference between managed stalemate and resumed bombing matters enormously for everyone living outside the negotiating rooms. There is one more piece of diplomatic context worth registering. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called the Iran campaign an epic fail and said Democrats would push for another war powers vote to limit Trump's military authority in Iran. The House is back in session next week. The political pressure on the administration to demonstrate diplomatic progress, not just military achievement, is growing measurably with every $4.15 gallon of gas. Let us close with the strategic picture, which today has more clarity than at any point since the war began. The war has produced a ceasefire. The ceasefire produced talks. The talks produced a specific gap, 20 years versus 5 years on a uranium enrichment moratorium. The blockade produced a second phone call and a second round of talks.
And while the talks are happening, both sides are simultaneously strengthening their positions for what comes after. Iran clearing its missile tunnels and hardening its uranium storage. The U.S. maintaining naval superiority and mine-clearing operations in the Strait. This is what negotiated deterrence actually looks like. Not trust, not goodwill. Two parties who just spent 47 days trying to destroy each other, communicating through intermediaries about the length of a number on a document, while simultaneously preparing for the scenario where the number proves unacceptable. The 15-year gap between 20 and 5 is not just a diplomatic obstacle. It is also a mirror. It reflects exactly how much trust exists between these two countries, which is to say, the amount that can be quantified in years on a page and not one day more. 6 days to April 21st. Watch the number.